You're holding what was once the world's most trusted currency. Not gold, not silver, a seashell. For over 2,000 years, this little shell, the cowrie, was money for half the planet. But here's what's wild. It worked better than most currencies we use today. And understanding why it worked reveals everything broken about modern money. Before we dive deep into how a seashell became more valuable than metal, hit subscribe. Because if you're curious about the hidden mechanics that make economies rise and fall, you're in exactly the right place. Let's start with a question nobody asks. What makes money money? You might say government backing, or scarcity, or usefulness. But the cowrie shell had none of those things in the traditional sense. No king stamped it. No central bank controlled it. You couldn't eat it or build with it. Yet from the coast of West Africa to the interior of China, from Indian Ocean trade routes to Pacific island networks, people trusted this shell with their lives. The cowrie wasn't just accepted as money, it was preferred over alternatives. And that preference lasted longer than most empires. Here's the thing about the cowrie that made it perfect. First, portability. These shells are small, lightweight, uniform in size. You could carry a fortune in a bag. Second, durability. Cowries don't rot, rust, or shatter easily. Bury them for 100 years, dig them up, and they're still currency. Third, recognizability. The cowrie has a distinctive shape and glossy finish that's nearly impossible to counterfeit with pre-industrial technology. But fourth, and this is crucial, scarcity with availability. Cowries came from one primary source, the Maldives archipelago in the Indian Ocean. This created natural scarcity. You couldn't just find them on any beach. But they weren't so rare that trade stopped. The supply was steady, predictable, manageable. Now here's where it gets interesting. The cowrie economy wasn't imposed from above. It emerged organically across continents that never coordinated with each other. In West Africa, by the 14th century, cowries were the dominant currency from Senegal to Nigeria. The Kingdom of Benin, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, all running on shells. Meanwhile, in China during the Shang Dynasty, cowries were already currency 3,000 years ago. The Chinese character for money, even today, contains the radical for cowrie shell. That's how deep it goes. In India, cowries circulated alongside metal coins for centuries. Different continents, different cultures, same solution. Why? Because the cowrie solved the fundamental problem of money, trust. When you're trading across vast distances with people you've never met, you need a medium everyone recognizes and values. Gold works, but it's too valuable for small transactions and easy to adulterate. Silver works better, but it's still metal. You need smelting, standardization, enforcement. Cowries? Self-evident. You can see if it's real. You can count them. You can subdivide them. A farmer in rural Yorubaland could accept cowries from a Saharan trader with confidence, not because some authority guaranteed it, but because the shells themselves were the guarantee. Let's talk numbers. In 18th century West Africa, exchange rates were surprisingly stable. One person could be purchased in the slave trade for roughly 40,000 to 60,000 cowries, depending on the region. A chicken might cost 100 to 300 cowries. A bag of salt, maybe 500. These weren't official rates set by kings. They emerged from market forces, supply and demand, collective agreement. This is what modern economists call a spontaneous order. No Federal Reserve, no monetary policy committee, just millions of individual transactions creating consensus on value. But here's the dark turn. European traders noticed something. If you controlled the cowrie supply, you controlled the economy. And the Europeans had ships, big ships. By the 17th century, Portuguese, Dutch, and British traders were importing cowries from the Maldives and East African coasts by the literal ton. They'd sail to the Indian Ocean, load up on shells, sail to West Africa, and flood the market. Why? because they could trade cowries for gold, ivory, and slaves at rates that made them rich. But there was a problem. When you dump millions of new cowries into an economy, you get inflation, classic monetary expansion. By the late 1700s, the cowrie inflation in West Africa was severe. What once cost 100 cowries now cost 1,000, then 10,000. The purchasing power collapsed. Local kingdoms tried to respond. Some banned foreign cowries, some tried to regulate exchange rates. But how do you enforce monetary policy when the currency literally washes up on beaches and arrives in European ships? You can't. The system that had worked for centuries started breaking. Not because cowries were bad money, but because someone weaponized the supply. And here's the thing Europeans understood but rarely said out loud. Destroying local currency is conquest by another name. When you destabilize a monetary system, you destabilize everything. Trade breaks down. Savings evaporate. Trust collapses. People become desperate. And desperate people are easier to control, easier to exploit, easier to colonize. So when the British and French formally colonized West Africa in the 19th century, one of their first moves was monetary. They banned cowries. They imposed francs and pounds. They didn't just conquer land, they conquered the medium of exchange. This wasn't unique to Africa. The same pattern played out everywhere cowries circulated. In India, the British East India Company slowly phased out cowries in favor of rupees. In parts of China, Western silver dollars displaced traditional currencies, including cowries. The message was clear. Your money isn't real money. Our money is real money. But what made their money more real? Only force. The cowrie had proven itself over millennia. The franc and the pound were backed by guns and bureaucracy. Yet we're taught to think of cowries as primitive and European currencies as advanced. It's backward. Let's zoom out. The cowrie economy reveals three truths about money that we've forgotten. First, money doesn't need government to work. It needs trust, and trust can be built on physical properties, scarcity, and social consensus. The cowrie had all three. Second, controlling money is controlling people. Whoever controls the supply controls the economy, and whoever controls the economy controls the political order. European cowrie imports weren't just trade, they were economic warfare. Third, monetary systems are fragile. Inflate the supply and you destroy confidence. Destroy confidence and you destroy the economy. It's happened with cowries, with Weimar marks, with Zimbabwean dollars, and it's happening right now with every major currency through quantitative easing and deficit spending. Now you might be thinking, sure, cowries worked for simple economies, but modern economies are complex. We need central banks and fiat currency, do we? The cowrie economy supported long-distance trade, complex credit arrangements, and sophisticated financial instruments like loans and futures contracts. West African merchants extended credit using cowries as collateral. Chinese traders hedged exchange rate risk between cowries and copper cash. Indian moneylenders calculated interest in cowrie terms. This wasn't a barter economy. It was a fully monetized, financialized system. It just didn't have a printing press. And maybe that was the point. The cowrie couldn't be printed. It had to be found, harvested, transported. That natural limit on supply meant natural limits on inflation, on debt, on leverage. You couldn't inflate your way out of problems. You couldn't borrow infinite money from the future. You had to live within your means. For some, that sounds like a prison. For others, it sounds like sanity. Here's the final twist. Cowries are still used today. In some rural parts of Nigeria, Ghana, and Benin, cowries circulate as currency, not officially, but practically. People accept them for small transactions, especially in markets where government currency is scarce or trust in banks is low. It's marginal, it's informal, but it's real. A currency banned by colonizers over a century ago still has users. That's staying power. That's proof of concept. That's what happens when money is actually trusted rather than imposed. So what's the lesson? Money is whatever people agree it is. The cowrie worked because millions of people across thousands of years agreed it worked. It didn't need a state or an army. It needed properties that made sense. Scarcity, durability, recognizability, divisibility. Modern currencies have abandoned most of those. They're infinite, digital, controlled by committees who answer to no one. We're told this is progress. But when inflation spikes, when banks collapse, when currencies fail, people reach for alternatives. Sometimes that's gold. Sometimes it's Bitcoin. And sometimes, in a village market in West Africa, it's still a cowrie shell. If this kind of deep dive into the hidden systems that run the world is your thing, you need to subscribe. We're just getting started on how money, power, and history collide. The cowrie was just one shell. Imagine what we'll uncover next.